So over this last weekend of June 2016, I went along to Tankfest 2016 at the famous Bovington Tank Museum in Dorset, England. And it was my first time going. I was really excited. Went along with a few friends who were kind of fellow tank military enthusiasts, shall we say. And although it was an extremely long drive from where I live, although I am on the south of England, it still was about a 3-hour journey for me. Luckily I wasn't doing the driving though. It was well worth it. It was a fantastic day. I went on the Sunday, which was day 2 of Tankfest. And this was sort of an event the museum do every year where they do sort of a battle reenactment, drive lots of tanks around in their field, do a bit of a commentary on various vehicles. Really good, really well organised, and obviously the museum's open as well. So this video is just a bit of a overview of some of the photographs I took, and I'm going to wrap it up with just a few tiny videos I shot, but I didn't do many videos because I didn't want to spend all day holding my phone in the air. But I'm just going to go over the pictures. I was very excited. I saw pretty much every tank I wanted to see, except for the German Tiger 1, which was actually at the museum. It wasn't in its actual usual place though. I later on saw it and took a video of it because it was actually being driven around in the fields as part of the battle reenactment at the end. That's Tiger 131, which was used in the film Fury, last remaining Tiger 1 I think, or active vehicle. It's active Tiger 1 that is. So as we arrived, first thing we came across by the main gate was this fantastic sight of a German World War One era A7V. I always forget the name of it. I think it's A7V, which was pretty much the Germans' response to the British Mark 1, which was the famous rhomboid shaped heavy, well, tank, not heavy tank, just tank, medium I guess. It didn't really have a classification then in terms of weight. But this was, I mean, in many ways I think this was probably a superior vehicle to the Mark 1. I think there was a famous case, a famous incident of tank combat in World War One, the first ever recorded tank combat, where this A7V or AV7, let me say, I don't know the name, I forgot. It's engaged a British Mark 1, and after many hours of just grinding around in mud, I think arguably the A7 did prove the superior vehicle, but very contentious, lots of different accounts, and apparently the Mark 1s weren't even actively trying to engage the German tank. They were too focused on infantry and things, so it wasn't really a tank battle. But anyway, let's move on. This was a German, sorry, no, this was a British just a bridge builder essentially. Don't know what it actually is under there. It's just a modern British Army bridge builder. I missed the actual show, but I think they probably demonstrated the bridge being constructed. But I just caught a little shot of that there. Nothing really. Pretty much the second or third photograph I took of the day, I think, and just caught the tail end of it. But it's quite impressive to see. But unfortunately, I didn't actually see the bridge getting erected. But oh well. So parts up next to it, there was a nice array of vehicles, I think just being used for the show, and I didn't spend much of the time watching Tankfest, to be honest. I spent more time in the museum because I was so eager to see the vehicles in there. But this was I think this looks like a Challenger 1 maybe. Looks like it might be a Challenger 1, not a Challenger 2, but I wouldn't want to gamble on that one, I'm not 100%, but I just thought it looked pretty cool. Reminds me a little bit of a toy I used to have, and I used to always have it so the turret was facing the rear like that. So that's actually why I took that photograph, to be honest. No other real reason. But lots of nice tanks around there, mostly modern actually. I think there was a British Army show where they were showing armoured cars as well, so you had warrior vehicles and things like that there as well. But right next to them we got this lovely sight of the Mark 1, World War One era British tank, first ever real tank built, unless you include the prototype Little Willie, which we'll come on to later. But this is a great tank. I think it's always terrified me actually, this Mark 1, the way it's designed, the rhomboid shape. It's actually kind of hellish, the idea of that coming at you in a trench. Just looks sort of, I don't know, inhuman and just alien almost. It just looks like this really emotionless shape coming at you, and it was good to see that. I'm not sure if they actually drove that or not. It was parked up outside, so maybe they did. I didn't see it though, sadly. But great vehicle, and that's a male variant because it's got the 6-pounder turrets next to the sides there. The female variant had a machine gun, which was designed to kind of defend the male when it came around the flanks of the male. So this was I didn't really take many pictures like this. This is only one or two like this, but this was just a shot of some of the activities and events that were going on at Tankfest. So lots of World War II enthusiasts, battle reenactors and that, dressed up to look the part. I love seeing all that, I really do. And this was the Soviet section next to the Vietnam American era section, and they got the kids in the trenches and let them wear the hats and hold the machine guns and things. So right next to that there was a sort of warehouse, and I thought it was just a storage depot really, but it's not. You can walk around there, and everyone was around there looking. And it's really just a place where they store all the relics and stuff that they need to paint up and do things with, really. Just a kind of place to store tanks, a bit like you see with steam engines. And I don't know what this one is. It looks a little bit like an IS-2, but I'm surely not. I'm not entirely sure. Probably just an old T-55 or something. I'm not entirely sure. But this section, it kind of got me a bit emotional, really, to begin with. Just being left in this warehouse, but they got to store them somewhere, and you're able to walk around and see them all, so it's actually really cool. So I was just in the seventh heaven looking at some of these vehicles, trying to work out what they were called, which ones they were. Some of them didn't even have associated kind of signs next to them, so you couldn't tell what they were unless you're a real geek. But I worked out what most of them were. So this one here, for example, was a Challenger 1 again. I think it was a target tank, so it was just used for practice. But it's good to see it. You get an idea of the size of the vehicle in relation to how big you are as a person. It's quite, when you see tanks in reality, they're colossal beasts. They really are. No idea what that one is there, but I think some of these look like they were kind of maybe KV1s or something like that. But I'm not entirely sure, and they weren't actually marked, they weren't labelled, so it's difficult to know for sure what's going on there. And a lot of them were sort of armoured cars as well, which are not really my forte. I'm not too up on armoured cars. So we went round the back, and I don't know these people, they just happened to be in shot. There's a lot of that. I took some real fast pictures in some of these. But this vehicle here, which I think I took another picture of, this is a British 50s Cold War era heavy gun, and I had not heard of this vehicle before. I think it was an F2000 or something along those lines. I forgot the name now, but actually I didn't get another shot of it there, but it's just on the left of that frame, so it looks a little bit like a Soviet era KV. It's got that huge turret, and this tank next to it, I can't remember, I think this was a T-55 or something along those lines. They look very similar to those tanks. At first I thought it was an IS-3, but I thought there's no way they would just dump an IS-3 in the corner of some warehouse. I think they would probably want it a little bit more prominent on display. But then again, so many of these vehicles are impressive that I think they were essentially running out of room now. Like they could just have them all in the main museum, really, if they're restored nicely. Some of them need a bit of a paint job, really. I don't think many of these actually drive now, but I don't know, they may be trying to restore them. Don't know what that is. Didn't really get a particularly good angle on that one. Interesting turret though, but not sure what that is. A lot of these were 50s experimental British tanks that I don't really think were used much, if at all, actually. Some of them were prototypes, not stuff I'd heard of before though, so I certainly learnt a lot there. One thing I definitely did take away from this day was the Brits. They definitely were good at making tanks by the end of World War II and into the Cold War. Really were. They had their A game on. And that was a nice Sherman there, just that last shot. Lots of Shermans. I think Shermans are great, but they don't really excite me, if I'm honest. I've never been excited by a Sherman, but they were good at what they did at the end of the day. So this is a nice vantage point up in that same warehouse, gives you an idea of how big the place is. There was some sort of World of Tanks event going on there, which was cool, but a lot of people seem to be there purely to see the World of Tanks tournament and to get people to. There were a few YouTubers there, World of Tanks YouTubers, and there was a huge queue for one particular guy. don't know who he was because I'm not up on World of Tanks really, or I certainly am not up on the YouTube World of Tanks scene. But I presume he was a good player or something along those lines. But so many people trying to get his autograph, and I thought, well, Jesus, you know, you're here to look at real tanks, surely. But I think some of them were purely there to see the World of Tanks event, really. But they fund the museum, I think. I think they sponsor it now. They don't fully fund it, but I think they help. So it's fine. So, and actually, funnily enough, somebody actually did recognise me and said, oh, it's Gunishment, which I was a bit confused by because I've not actually uploaded any videos of myself in years. I did used to do reaction videos, and somebody obviously recognised me from one of those from like 2012. So, but yeah, I just had a bit of a very brief chat with them. Just said, yeah, you're cool. You're probably watching this, and if you are, hello. So this was an interesting vehicle. I was very impressed by the look of that one. And that turned out to be a Chieftain, which was a kind of an early version of a British, what later became essentially a Challenger, I think. So anyway, later on, this was the beginning of the main museum section, and there's a lovely World War I section, and this was how it starts. I thought this was a very poignant, very nice display here of a medic, female medic, seeing to a wounded Allied troop there, British Allied troop, and I just thought that was a fantastic. It really actually did move me, to be honest. I'm not entirely sure why. It's just the way it was done. It was just very poignant. And as you go in, there's a sort of trench line you walk through to get an idea of what life was like in the trenches. And this is a fantastic bit here where a Mark 1 is kind of coming over a trench line. And I didn't get a shot, but there's some German troops kind of looking at it, terrified, aiming their rifles at it. But the idea of that coming at you over a trench line is completely terrifying. The idea that that could squash you and just utterly obliterate anyone who's in its path. Just a nice little shot of a motorbike there. I'm not up on motorbikes, but that had the Vickers machine gun attachment. Pretty cool. And this is where we kind of end. Obviously, there was a lot I saw before, but then we entered into the World War II tank section, and this is where I really started to take lots of pictures. This is the main museum, so they're all done up and painted nicely. So the first thing I think we came across, I think that's a cruiser, an A2 cruiser, something along those lines. And then boom, the one I was really hoping to see, the one on my tick list, obviously, I think for most people who go here, this is the big one. The King Tiger, or Tiger 2, or Royal Tiger, whatever you want to call it. And they've got two of these actually, which I didn't realise, but this was the nicest one with the nice camo, Western Front camo, I guess, perhaps Eastern Front as well. Looks like Flecktarn camo almost. Fantastic vehicle, and when you see it in the flesh, it's just incredible. And again, look at this, an M26 General Pershing heavy tank, and a brilliant tank. And again, an amazing turret design. I've always thought the turret of that was really cool, really nice tank, the Pershing. And just behind it there you can see a Jag Panther, or Jag Panther. I know I always call it Jag, but it's a Jag Panther, which again, fantastic. And they've really done a good job keeping these tanks in nice order. They look pretty much like they're just off the assembly line, quite honestly, some of them. And I think just further along, yep, this is the second Tiger, so a slightly different camo pattern here. Just as cool, really, I guess. And yeah, just a formidable tank. Looks so ahead of its time. Awesome shape. Just an awesome vehicle. And it's the first time I've ever seen these vehicles in the flesh, so it was quite impressive. I stood there for about 10 minutes just kind of looking at it and patting the metal and walking around the tracks and just sort of taking it in, really. Just amazing. One thing that always blows me away when I see tanks is how the hell do they construct these damn things? When you actually see them, the industry involved in building these vehicles is colossal. It's like the height of heavy industry, really, along with huge locomotive trains and boats. So this was a really nice little display they had, and I think this was the inside of a Chieftain tank. I think it was a Chieftain, or it may have been the later variant of the Chieftain, which I always forget the name. It was Chieftain or the Centurion, or maybe the Centurion. I think the Centurion came before the Chieftain, so this was a Chieftain, I think. So it just goes to show how cramped the conditions were. I had no idea quite how cramped this vehicle was. I think this particular tank was particularly cramped, surely, but look at that. There's absolutely no room to move whatsoever in that vehicle. And I mean, you couldn't spend long in there, you couldn't sleep in there. you'd have to just get in and out and sleep outside in a tent or something. But I think that was a particular design of that tank. Maybe the idea was to keep a low profile on the vehicle. If I remember right, that looks like a Centurion to me. There were a hell of a lot of Centurions and Chieftains at Bovington, and that's cool because I think they're phenomenal tanks. And they talked a lot actually about the Centurion being a fantastic vehicle, which I've always known about. But it really was I mean, it didn't quite see combat in World War II. It came in too late. But when it did start to see combat I think in Korea, it really did hold its ground. And that's a lovely paint job on that one. There are about 3 or 4 of those. There was one that had its turret raised, you can see just on the right there. And I did actually go in a Mark 1, by the way. I didn't take any pictures because it was way too cramped, but a Mark 1, the World War I rhomboid, famous rhomboid tank. And that was quite an interesting experience, actually being inside one of those. Really is claustrophobic as hell. And just the idea of being in that when the engine's running and there's bullets firing and ricocheting around outside, just they were not designed with human beings in mind, some of these vehicles, the early ones. Now that looks fantastic. That from that angle, that looks like a modern tank. That almost looks like the Israeli Merkava tank, but I think that's actually just a Centurion or a Chieftain again. I think all 3 of these were actually just Chieftain tanks with slightly modified attachments and paint jobs, essentially. Maybe different marks of the same variant tank, but they look great. They really do. And I think all of these ultimately took British tank design closer and closer towards what is now the main battle tank of the army in Britain, which is the Challenger 2 tank, which is one of the best tanks in the world, I think, along with the Leopard 2, the M1A1 or A2 Abrams. The new Russian Armata tank, which looks phenomenal, T-14. And I think the Israeli tank's pretty good as well, from what I've read. Can't think of many others. But anyway, this is a Black Prince. I didn't know they had one of these there. First of all, it was a Churchill, and then I went around the side and realised it's a Black Prince. Fantastic. Lovely looking vehicle. And I did read that board they've got in front of it there. Every tank's got a nice bit of history associated with it you can read up on, which is what you'd expect really from a museum. But this was very good. It was all about talking about how it never really saw combat. It came in a little too late, if I remember right. But even so, they did get the thing built, and it was kind of designed to be a heavier, more hardcore version of a Churchill, really. And I think it was a pretty damn good tank, but it just never really got utilised enough. Basically because the war ended, I think, along with vehicles like the Centurion. So, and by the way, there were a hell of. It was great to see, but lots of Russians at the Tank Museum, and I got chatting to a few of them. Awesome people, and they really know their tanks. And I think people come from all over the world, but it seems very Russian. Lots of Russians. It may have just been a coach party I just kept stumbling into. Anyway, obviously, look at this, the Jagdtiger, my favourite tank of World War II, I think, pretty much. And I knew they had one here, and I was really excited, and as soon as I saw it I was blown away. And everyone who comes to the museum spends about 10 minutes just hanging around this tank, I think, because it's just so formidable, and you just realise that it's just a pure piece of armour. It's pretty much indestructible, and it even said that when it's in the right defensive position during the war it was basically indestructible. The Allies pretty much just wrote off the idea of attacking it. They probably just used artillery or airstrikes. Got a nice shot there of the turret in the foreground there. And it was rifled, interestingly, the turret. I felt that little groove there, and it's a rifled turret, which, yeah, I suppose I'm not surprised by that, but I didn't know if the Germans rifled their turrets. The British still rifle their tank turrets. Apparently they're the only ones to do that now. The Challenger 2 is the only modern tank to have a rifled turret, which is, just a little geeky fact. So, yeah, the Jagdtiger, I spent about 20 minutes there, just basically just in awe, really. Just like, wow, this is the coolest vehicle ever. And I don't think they've got a Sturm Tiger there, sadly, but they did have this nice little little section just right by the Jagdtiger, in fact, just talking about the Sturmtiger's 280mm cannon, and just went into detail about that. And it's very much like what you see in Men of War. It's just a beast vehicle that was just designed to fire this huge projectile and not really do a lot else, quite honestly. But I don't think there's any remaining Sturmtigers. I mean, there may well be, in fact, but there certainly aren't any at Bovington. But I do have that weapon there, which is good to see. So further down, quite near where the Jagdtiger was, we have this awesome, lovely British late A39 Tortoise. I always call it the Turtle, which it's not, it's a tortoise. And I've done a video of this tank before. I've talked about this tank before in Men of War context. This is just I just love the design of this tank. It's so unique. But again, it wasn't really used much in World War II because it came in so late. But this was really when the Brits started to roll out really bizarre, interesting tank designs. Some of them I think would have been great, others perhaps not so great in reality. I reckon this one would have been interesting though. It was kind of like the British version of a Sturmtiger, just a big ass gun designed to just fire at buildings, I think, essentially. It wasn't really an anti-tank tank, it wasn't a tank destroyer. But it was just very much just a piece, an artillery piece really, on wheels or on tracks in this context. So this is a bit odd. So near where the Tortoise lives at the museum, there's a sort of side section, and kind of as minor criticism of the way they've laid out the museum, but I almost missed this whole section because it looked like a child's play area. But right by this kind of child's playpen with loads of like toddlers and kids running around, there's this amazing tank which I hadn't even heard of before called a TOG 2, which is a British early World War II era prototype tank which never really got used, but it was designed because the Brits thought that World War II was essentially going to be similar to World War I, and it was going to be all about trench warfare. So they just built this beast tank which was way heavier than anything I think the Germans or the French had at the time, an 80-ton tank, and look at it, it's just formidable. And they built this prototype, but they soon realised that World War II was going to be all about mobility and speed and movement. It wasn't going to be about trenches and stalemates. So I think this tank basically just got written off really. But it's great to see that they've still got the TOG 2 there. But I think it needs a more prominent place in the museum. I don't think it should just be dumped in this sort of weird section near a kids' play area and a snack bar. But yeah, you never know. Maybe when it's not Tankfest, they have that section laid out slightly differently and it's a little bit more prominent and respectful. It just basically doesn't seem respectful. I don't know. I don't really have any major issue with it, I suppose, but yeah, I don't know. It just seems like a tank that you could easily miss. I'm sure a lot of people go to the museum and miss that tank because it's just in this far corner away from all the other vehicles. And to be honest with you, at first I didn't even think it was a real tank. I thought it was a kid's play area and it was just designed like a climbing frame. But then I actually realised it's actually a goddamn tank, and the heaviest tank in the museum, in fact, 80 tons. So significantly the heaviest tank there. Very interesting and an amazing vehicle. Looks incredible. Shame it never really got utilised. So that's the TOG 2. And in the same kind of side section, and for all I know they deck this out differently when it's not a big event like Tankfest, so I could have to, I'm just talking crap for all this. You've got a lovely, again, British Conqueror heavy gun. I hadn't heard of this vehicle before. This is like a variant of... Terrible photograph, by the way. I didn't get that angle right. The sunlight's coming in directly there, so you kind of just see a silhouette of the vehicle almost there. But you've got a Conqueror on the left, which is just a heavy tank, heavy gun. And on the right, I think that's just a... well, you tell me. It looks like it's probably a Challenger 1, or it could just be a Chieftain. Another Chieftain, which I think came after the Centurion. But Conqueror looked phenomenal. It looked like a lovely vehicle, really classically designed looking big ass tank. The kind of, I don't know, like an iconic tank. When you think of a tank, that's what I think of, something like that, the Conqueror. Just wish I got a better photograph, but there's going to be a ton out there on the internet anyway. But yeah, nice vehicle. I think again 50s Cold War era vehicle, and obviously possibly saw a little bit of combat in, well, maybe not. It probably never really saw combat. It may have got sold to militaries around the world outside of Britain, maybe. Don't really know the details behind that. But these are all things I want to read up on. Now my eyes have been opened to loads of vehicles that I didn't really know a great deal about. And that's what's great about Bovington. If you love your tanks, it's tank haven, really. It's just the place to go for tanks. So later on, there was another section which I almost missed entirely, just because I was so excitable. I just kind of aimlessly walked around the museum and almost missed entire areas, entire wings. So Little Willie, I guess many know this is basically the first ever tank prototype ever built, and as a result of a stalemate situation in World War One, the British decided they needed a sort of breakthrough vehicle, which was what they originally called it, just a breakthrough vehicle. And they didn't really think about what this might lead to. They just wanted a big vehicle with armour that could negotiate trenches, carry people in relative protection from small arms fire, and just get them from one side of no man's land to the other side, pretty much. And that was what Little Willie was all about. But later, as they developed it, they created vision slits for rifles, etc., and all that kind of thing. And then eventually, obviously, the Mark 1, the male and female variants of the machine guns, and the 6-pounder positions for the main guns for the male variant. But this was a great starting point for tanks, and the Brits built this damn thing, rolled it out, created the first prototype tank. And I'm reading a great book actually about tanks called Tank Men, which I'm going to do a review of once I've finished it. Great book, by the way, just about tanks in general and the reality of tank combat when you're a crewman in a vehicle. Lots of accounts from real battles of World War One and Two. So this is an interesting tank. Unfortunately, I don't know what this vehicle's called. I can't read that sign from here on the right, which is a shame really, and I feel disappointed by that, because there was an interesting, on the back of this particular vehicle, there's a plaque dedicated to a soldier who receives a Victory Cross because they gallantly, during a battle, this is a World War One vehicle, came out of the tank during taking small arms fire, came out of the tank to assist with a crew who were outside and wounded, got them to safety, and then unfortunately was killed in action as a result of that move, and they got a Victory Cross for that, if I remember right. And that's the vehicle they used. That's the vehicle they came out of during the heat of combat, gallantly rescuing some people, assisting. So that's very moving, and yeah, it's just interesting that that's the actual vehicle. It's quite poignant really. And there's lots of little bits like that at the museum, lots of little pieces of history. And obviously a lovely German Panther here, which was on my list of tanks I absolutely was dying to see in the flesh. Probably up there for me with the Jagdtiger. Love this vehicle, just so streamlined, and just looks like the kind of... if I was in World War II and I had to be in a tank, stupid thing to say, but you get the drift of what I'm saying, this probably would be the vehicle I'd want to be rolling around in, because it's faster than most heavy tanks. It's got a good main gun. I think it was reliable from what I've read, and it had relatively decent armour. So it seems like a good balance, that's all I'm saying. I just thought it was a lovely vehicle. The section at the back did go into how it wasn't particularly effective against T-34s in reality, and it was a reaction to Russian armour, and the Germans didn't really utilise it that well. I think that's all debatable really, but yeah, it's interesting. It is obviously a reaction to the Russian armour, 1943, when it got rolled out. And then right next to that we've got the famous... Actually, no, I'll come on to that. I thought the next picture I took was of the famous Russian tank that needs no name, but no, I took one of this one. Don't know what that is. Looks like, oh no, I do know what that is. That's the French Char B of World War II fame. A tank I didn't know much about at all, which I was amazed by, because this tank, going into World War II, 1939, this was accepted as the best tank in the world at the time. The most is built by Renault, and it was the most technically proficient vehicle out there. And it really, really held the Germans up during the Battle of France. One Char B basically engaged 13 panzers and defeated them in one particular account. And that's something I'm reading in Tank Men, the book I mentioned earlier at the moment. Famous account of that. And basically the Germans really were not expecting a vehicle like this during the early phases of World War II. And it really forced them to redesign their tanks and really up their game pretty much, because early German panzers were not up to scratch at all compared to the Char B, and Shermans were also modelled on the Char B, which is interesting. The Americans based it on that. So obviously, without any further ado, here we go, the T-34, and just, yeah, amazing vehicle. One thing I will say actually is T-34's never excited me as a tank for some reason. But when you actually see it, it looks phenomenal. When you see it in the flesh, it's just such a fantastically designed vehicle. You can just tell how that armour is sloped in such a way that it blatantly, clearly just deflects shells. It's just designed to just deflect shell after shell, and it's light, and it can be repaired really, really easily. And it just is streamlined and just simplified, and just a nice, quick and easy vehicle to construct. But it's reliable and it's effective and it looks good. So I can understand the argument many have about that being the best tank of World War II, because it does tick most of the boxes, I would say. And I think there was another picture I took of this one. I think I went up that staircase there onto that. There we go, onto that little ledge and overlook the T-34, and it's just got a nice little prominent place there next to the Panther. And it's interesting when you see them both so close. They're kind of comparable sizes actually when you see them. I'm not sure which is the heaviest. I guess the Panther's probably heavier, I would have thought. The Panther had a much better suspension system apparently, but because it was more sophisticated, it was prone to breaking down more, which is the age-old thing about Russian armour being basically very basic, and its heart, and then therefore being more reliable, I guess. So I spent a long time here, as I'm sure you can imagine, and many people did. It kind of created a bit of a crowd, that particular spot in the museum. So further on, I think that's a Comet, World War II British Comet medium tank, or a Valentine. I'm not entirely sure which one that is. A lot of the British tanks look quite similar, the World War II early era ones. I think it's a Comet, pretty sure it's a Comet. It looks cool. I like them. I don't think people acknowledge British tanks as much as they should. I will say that, because I just think that they get overshadowed a lot by Russian and German tanks of World War II. But I do think they are pretty nice tanks. They got their acts in gear eventually. That's a Churchill, the good classic big fat Churchill. Looks good. I mean, I don't know how effective the Churchill was in reality. There are lots of variants of it. The Churchill Crocodile, the Flamer, all that kind of thing. I think it's pretty armoured, pretty well protected. It's just interesting how, what I find amazing about World War II era tanks is it's interesting how there were so many different ideas and ways of designing a vehicle that essentially is a tank. Everyone had a different idea of how to do it, different turret shapes, different designs, different sloping, etc. This is a Patton tank, which is awesome. I've always liked the look of the Patton tank. Just a very scary, formidable looking turret. Looks like it could just demolish a skyscraper, that turret. just the way it's designed, with a nice 50 caliber on top there. Looks very similar to what am I thinking of? It looks very similar to the Pershing in some ways. So what do we have next? I always forget. Aha, yes, it gets more modern now, but now we've got at first of all that was a Challenger 2, but it isn't. It's actually the Chieftain. It's another Chieftain, and they're great tanks. It looks phenomenal. There was a lot about how the Chieftain could have been a truly great tank, but for the engine. It didn't have a particularly reliable engine, unfortunately, so it wasn't a great export success. I think the Chieftain came after the Centurion, which was a very good tank. Chieftain was better than the Centurion, but it had flaws of its own, and it never quite did as well as it could have done. I think eventually the engine was improved and it went on to become a better vehicle, but it was basically always hampered by an engine issue, apparently. But it looks damn sexy, and I can see how it eventually became the Challenger. You can sort of see how it was designed. They had this design in mind, and they've just tinkered with it and eventually improved it. T-72 here, and this was a really interesting. I mean, this was really interesting for me because, I mean, Soviet tanks, there were so many of them, so many variants of the T tank, and then eventually you get to this Soviet era where really they pretty much nailed it. This was a tank that really could stand up to anything the West could throw at it. It can go underwater. It was used by militaries today, lots of kind of kits, upgrade kits, kind of keep it relevant. And they talked a little bit how you can buy, certain countries are now sending off these tanks for $30,000 and crazy things like that. You can buy them and build an army of T-72s, no problem whatsoever. And yeah, just a great vehicle, stood the test of time, still going strong. Thousands of them were built, and they got lower, and the profile of the Russian tanks got lower and lower. And that, I mean, you could see that how that started in World War II actually, with the IS tanks, the IS-3, so low profile compared to earlier tanks like the T-34, and that just continued, I think, that trend. So what else? Aha, yes, of course. So this was interesting. So this is a Leopard 1, which is about the same era as the British Chieftain, and the Germans essentially wanted to do something similar to what the Brits had achieved with the Chieftain, if I remember right, and they created the Leopard, which is a beautiful vehicle and arguably superior to the Chieftain. There was a bit there about that. Apparently the ideal tank, basically the perfect tank, would have been a tank with the Leopard's engine and tracks perhaps, but the Brits turret and the main gun. Chieftain was all about the main gun, L1A1 cannon, I think, can't remember what it's called now, but that was superior to the Leopard's main cannon there. But the Leopard was more mechanically reliable because of the engine. So basically, if you merge the two, you'd have a perfect tank of that era. So 1960s, I think, 50s, 60s, going into the 70s, I guess, perhaps. And then obviously became the Leopard 2, which is the German current main battle tank. And they do have one at Bovington, actually, seeing that bomb around in the field. I think there's a video of that I've got, and it looks crazy good. Challenger 2, so they've got a section here, Challenger 2 being the kind of progression of the Challenger 1, which saw action during the Gulf War, in the first Gulf War in the early 90s. They just kind of tinkered with it, and now they've got the Challenger 2, which has basically stood the test of time, saw action in Iraq and Afghanistan, Bosnia. I don't think any Challenger 2's ever been knocked out in combat. I think there was a blue on blue incident, apparently, where one Challenger 2 crew took out another Challenger 2 during the early days of the Iraq invasion. I think there's an account of that I remember reading. But basically the tank has never been defeated, even by an IED. I don't think. I might be wrong about that. And here we've got the Russian T-55, I think. Could be a T-55, I'm not too sure about that. Used a lot by Saddam's forces during the Gulf. A lot of them were knocked out by airstrikes. But decent tank. Probably outclassed during the Gulf War, to be honest. I think by just technology, really, by missile barrages and A-10 Warthog attacks, all that kind of thing. But a great vehicle. So there you go, that's the end of my pictures. I'm just going to end this video with a few little vids I shot, nothing too great. Hope you enjoyed it, and if you haven't been, definitely check it out. Fantastic day, awesome museum.
Ground-mounted anti-tank missile systems, you don't necessarily need a vehicle because it's to carry around your anti-tank capability. So I challenge you to work this one out. Many people might look at this and think it's a Russian tank called the T-54. In fact, this is a Chinese copy of the Russian T-54. And the tank is following it. Exhaust pipe to create that smoke screen. The following tank is called the T-72, and these are both Soviet-era vehicles that were really very clever. First of all, Russian designs, and then copied by the Chinese with that Type 59. So instead of making the inheritance the American M60 driving around the Type 59 and the T-72, Cold War era American tank. It was an evolutionary development from the M48. After World War II, you have, well, at the end of World War II, you have the famous Pershing tank. That was developed into the M48, what they call the Patton tank. And then a bit later on, very similar design, but larger, thicker armour, bigger turret, and bigger gun, the M60 or a dugout. They only gave it a machine gun, a Vickers machine gun in the top there. Very thick armour though, there's surprisingly thick armour to protect it because it was so slow as a target. It sees action with the 4th and the 7th battalions of the Royal Tank Regiment in France in 1940, but the vast majority are left behind in France. Very few remain in Britain. And we, even as it went in production in 1939, we've already started making a better tank called the Matilda II. And the Matilda II, another infantry tank, our own Matilda II, you may have seen driving around here at previous displays. At the moment, we're restoring it away with the co-driver. 3 crew members up in the turret, we've got commander, gunner, loader, and a tank that could be upgraded. 13 marks a Centurion went into service. Again, we did all sorts of different variations, bridge layers, a BARV, beach armoured recovery vehicle, you can see, again we have in the collection here in the Vehicle Conservation Centre. Lots of different versions, sold all around the world, 13 countries bought Centurion. Israel has still got variants in service. South Africa still use their Centurions as gun tanks, they call it the Olifant. Now another round hit the loader's hatch and shattered it. The key round, well aimed, as some veteran mentioned to me, I used to say the lucky shot, and then he said no, it was a well aimed shot. Goes under the barrel, grazes it under the mantlet and jams between the turret and the hull. We've never been able to pin down the exact crew, we've got a photograph of them. We've never been able to get them interviewed. One day, that's a full story, whether they were wounded, what happened to them.
So ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to give you that opportunity to take the photograph.